The sun was a fist, beating down on the cracked earth. In the middle of nowhere, a single cabin stood, its bones warped by 100 seasons of heat and cold. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of sickness, of iron and dried lavender, and the end of things. A woman lay on a bed made of rough pine. Her name used to be a song, but now it was just a whisper. Mama. Her lips trembled, trying to speak words that were already ghosts. Each breath she took made her lighter, like a piece of ash waiting for the wind to carry it away for good. 2 little boys knelt beside her. Twins, only 7 years old. They had the same face, but it was split in two by fear. One clutched his mother's hand, as if his small grip could anchor her to this world. The other stared at the door, willing someone, anyone, to walk through it and save them all. The floorboards groaned under their weight. The sound was like a dying heartbeat in the hollow room. The younger twin, John, spoke first. His voice was a dry crackle. They beat her again, didn't they? The elder, Eli, didn't answer. His jaw was set hard, a look he'd learned from a father he barely remembered. He touched his mother's arm, so gently, afraid she might turn to dust. Her skin was a furnace. The fever was eating her alive. Outside, the world was empty. Just cut wheat stalks, brittle as bone, stretching to the horizon. The boys could still see the tracks. Deep ruts in the dirt where the men's horses had stood waiting. The air still held the ghost smell of their cruelty, of smoke and cheap leather. They had come for the little that was left. A bit of grain, a silver locket, a piece of paper they said was theirs. When Mama said no, they made her pay. Now the silence in the cabin was a living thing. The clock on the wall had stopped. Even time was holding its breath. The boys had run out of tears. Crying didn't fix things out here. So they took turns, dipping a rag in a bucket and laying it on her forehead. The cloth would be bone dry in a minute. Her breath was a ragged, scraping sound. She mumbled a word neither of them could understand. Something about a river. Her hand twitched, pointing toward the broken window. Eli stood up so fast he almost fell. He'd seen that look before, in a fox caught in one of his pa's old traps. The body still fighting long after the spirit had already fled. She needs help, he said, his voice quiet but firm. From who? John whispered, his eyes wide. Eli looked past the dead fields, toward the dark hills that scraped the sky. From the mountain man. John shivered. The whole town talked about the mountain man. He lived up there in the pines, more comfortable with wolves than with people. They said he'd killed men in the war, and then killed another one just for a kindness. But they also said he'd saved the preacher's wife when the winter fever came for her. He had storm gray eyes and a voice that couldn't tell a lie. He'll come, Eli said, already walking toward the door. He was sure of it. He had to be. But what if he don't? John cried, scrambling after him. Eli stopped and looked back at his brother, his face old for a boy of 7. Then we die here too. They stepped out into the crushing heat. The door creaked shut, sealing them out of their own home. The sun felt like a judgment. Their shadows stretched out long and thin, pointing the way north. They carried nothing but a half-empty canteen and a piece of their mother's advice, whispered to them a lifetime ago. Be kind, even when the world forgets how. The land was huge and silent, except for the hum of a million insects. It was the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. They walked for what felt like years. Every fence post looked like a cross against the sky. Dust rose up around their bare feet like little ghosts. When one boy stumbled, the other pulled him up. When the heat became too much, they rested under the shade of a dead cottonwood tree, whispering prayers they couldn't quite remember the words to. By the afternoon, the sky began to change. Dark clouds piled up on the horizon, looking like another mountain range, one that was moving toward them. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain. John wanted to turn back. The cabin seemed safer now, but Eli's eyes were fixed on the hills. "She's waiting," he said, his throat raw. "Maybe she's already gone," John choked out. "Then we walk faster." The first drops of rain hit their faces, but they didn't stop. They pushed through the tall grass as the path grew rocky and steep. A stream cut through the land, a ribbon of cold silver in the fading light, and that's where they found him. He was kneeling by the water, his back to them. His hair was long and tied back with a leather strap. The rain fell on his broad shoulders. He was washing his hands, or maybe he was trying to wash something else away entirely. He looked up as they approached. He wasn't startled. He was just aware. The way a hawk is aware of the wind changing. The boys froze. The only sounds were the rain and their own ragged breathing. Eli finally took a step. "Sir," he said, his voice shaking but loud enough to be heard over the stream. "Our mama, she's dying." The man didn't move. His gaze, sharp and gray as a storm, flicked between the two of them, weighing the truth in their faces. "They beat her," Eli pushed on, the words tumbling out. "She won't wake up." Still, the man was silent. The water flowed past his feet, like time itself, refusing to stop for anyone. Then, he stood up. He was taller than they'd imagined. His shadow fell over them, not like a threat, but like a shelter. He looked from one small, desperate face to the other. "Show me," he said. He didn't ask their names. He didn't ask how far it was. He just slung a worn leather satchel over his shoulder, scooped John up into one strong arm as if he weighed nothing, and started walking back the way they came. His boots made a steady, certain sound in the mud. John clung to his chest, feeling the slow, powerful beat of a heart that had forgotten how to be afraid. Eli walked right beside him, his own fear melting away, replaced by something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. They walked through the twilight as the world turned to shades of blue and gray. The mountain man didn't say much. Only once, he asked, "How long has she been like this?" "Since yesterday," Eli answered from beside him. The man grunted. "That's a long time for pain to have its way." When the cabin came into view, it was just a dark shape against a darker sky, with a single faint glow in the window. The man stopped at the edge of the yard. His eyes, sharper than a normal man's, scanned the ground. He saw the deep wagon tracks, the hoof prints, and the heavy boot prints that led toward the cabin, but not away from it. His jaw tightened. He knew what kind of men left tracks like that. He walked on. Inside, the air was heavy and sick. He set John down gently and moved to the bed. The woman's breathing was a shallow flutter. Her skin was as pale as driftwood washed up on a shore. He put his fingers to her wrist. The pulse was there, faint as a moth's wing, but it was there. Her lips moved. He leaned close. He thought he heard a name. "You held on," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "You held on for them." He worked with a quiet purpose, taking herbs from his satchel and mixing them with water. He cooled her forehead, his movements gentle. He cleaned the bruises on her face, and his expression never changed, but the twins saw his knuckles turn white. They watched him, two small shadows in the corner, too scared to speak. He moved with the kind of calm that only comes from seeing the worst things in the world, over and over again. His eyes softened when he looked at the boys. Two little sparks of light in a world gone dark. Eventually, John fell asleep on the floor, curled up like a stray puppy. Eli stayed awake, sitting by the window, watching the darkness. The man's voice was low, like rocks grinding together. "You got a name, boy?" "Eli, he's John." "Eli and John," the man repeated, as if the names themselves had power. "You two stick close. The world is a heavy load to bear alone." Eli just nodded. He didn't understand all of it, but he understood the feeling. This man's voice was the opposite of the men who had hurt his mother. Hours crawled by. The candle burned down to a stub. The woman on the bed stirred, murmuring something about a field of light. The man gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. As he did, his hand froze. His fingers had brushed against a scar on her collarbone, hidden beneath the collar of her nightdress. It wasn't an old, faded scar. It was a brand. An ugly, puckered shape he knew as well as his own reflection. It was the mark of the men he used to ride with. The men he once called brothers. He pulled his hand back as if he'd been burned. He stood up and walked to the door, his face a mask of stone. He stepped out onto the porch, breathing in the night air, which smelled of rain and dust. Thunder rumbled in the distance. He leaned against the porch post and closed his eyes. He wasn't praying to any god he knew. He was making a promise to a memory. I'll do better this time. I'll save this one. Behind him, Eli's small voice cut through the silence. Will she die? The man didn't open his eyes. He didn't turn around. She might, he said, his voice rough. But not tonight. How do you know? Because she's still waiting for something. What? Eli asked, taking a step closer. The man finally turned, his expression impossible to read in the dark. For me, he said softly, and went back inside. He sat by that bed until the first hint of dawn, listening to the storm pass and the birds begin to sing. Just as the sun touched the horizon, her fever broke. He felt the heat leave her skin, and he let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The boys were asleep on the floor, their arms thrown over each other. He looked at them, and for a moment, the hard lines of his face softened. But then he remembered the brand. The past wasn't done with him. It had found him, here in this broken-down cabin. He reached into his satchel and pulled out an old, tarnished silver locket. He clicked it open. Inside, there wasn't a picture, just a drawing, a sketch of a woman's face. She looked a lot like the woman lying in the bed. He traced the lines of her face with his thumb, his eyes 1,000 miles away. The sun was coming up now, casting long shadows across the floor. The woman stirred again. Her eyes fluttered open, just for a second. But in that second, her gaze found his. And she whispered a word. A single word he hadn't heard spoken in 10 long years. His name. Silas. He froze. The locket dropped from his numb fingers, landing without a sound on the dusty blanket. He stared at her face, bruised and broken, but so painfully familiar it felt like a knife twisting in his gut. The years between then and now collapsed into nothing. The world outside went quiet, and in that crushing silence, the truth hit him harder than any bullet. This wasn't just some random woman. This wasn't just another soul he'd been called to save. The dying mother of these 2 boys was the wife he had abandoned a decade ago. The morning light felt like an accusation. It touched the sleeping faces of Eli and John, who looked so much like her, and then it fell on Silas, who hadn't moved an inch. He was a statue carved from regret. He hadn't just left a woman. He'd left his sons. He'd left his own life behind. She stirred again, her eyes opening, clearer this time. The fever was gone, but the pain was still there, swimming in their depths. Recognition dawned on her face, followed by something that broke his heart all over again. Betrayal. Silas, she whispered, her voice a fragile thing. You left. He couldn't look at her. He just closed his eyes. I know, he said, the words tasting like ash, and I came back too late. Her hand, so thin he could see the bones, reached for his. He took it, terrified it might crumble in his grasp. The boys, she breathed. They don't know. They won't, he promised, a vow that felt hollow even as he said it. How could they not? They had his eyes. The twins woke up a few minutes later. John, the younger one, saw Silas and a sleepy smile touched his lips. It was the kind of innocent trust that could shatter a man's soul. But Eli, the older one, was wary. He'd learned that men who appeared in the night often brought more trouble than they solved. His gaze was steady, judging. Silas met that gaze without flinching. "She's resting easy now," he told them. "You did good, Eli. You did right to come find me." The boy just nodded, his small shoulders still rigid. "You ain't like the others." "No," Silas said, and it felt like an oath. "Not anymore." He spent the morning tending to her, to them. He fixed the broken door latch. He split firewood, the rhythmic thump of the axe a steady beat against the silence. He made a thin broth and helped her drink. Each movement was deliberate, full of a care he didn't know he still possessed. The boys watched him from the porch. "Do you think he can fix her?" John whispered. Eli watched the man's strong back, the way he moved like he belonged there. "He looks like he could fix anything." But Silas knew that wasn't true. Some things, once broken, could never be made whole again. He kept glancing toward the southern horizon. He felt it in his bones, a low hum of dread. They were coming back. Cruelty is a patient hunter. It always circles back. He saw the dust first, a faint plume miles away, rising against the blue sky. The rhythm was familiar. 4 horses, moving steady. Not in a hurry. They were confident. He walked back into the cabin and quietly laid his old rifle on the table. Eli's eyes went wide. "Are they coming?" "Maybe," Silas said, his voice calm, belying the storm in his chest. "You and John, stay inside with your mama. And you keep quiet, understand?" She tried to push herself up in the bed. "Silas, no. They'll kill you." He knelt beside her, taking her hand. It felt stronger now. "They can try." "You can still go," she pleaded, her eyes shining with fear for him. "Take the boys. Run. Don't let them take your life for mine." He looked into her eyes, the same eyes he'd fallen in love with all those years ago. "I already ran once, Mary. I'm not running again." The sound was closer now. The jingle of harnesses, the creak of leather, and laughter. The easy, ugly laughter of men who believe they own the world. Silas checked the chamber of his rifle. 1 bullet. He had 1 bullet. He turned to his sons, who were huddled by the bed, their faces pale. "Don't you move until I tell you to." Then he stepped out onto the porch and closed the door behind him. The day was bright and beautiful, a cruel joke. The heat shimmered off the plains. 4 riders solidified out of the haze, the same 4 men from before. Their leader, a big man with a scar that cut through his eyebrow, swung down from his horse. His boots hit the dirt with a thump. "Well, I'll be," he called out, a grin splitting his face. "Looks like the lady of the house has company." The other men snickered. Silas said nothing. He just stood there, a mountain of a man, his face unreadable. "We just came to see if she learned her lesson," another one sneered. The leader stepped closer. "Who are you?" "Her new man." Silas's voice, when it came, was quiet, dangerously quiet. "I'm the reckoning." The laughter died in their throats. There was something in his stillness, in the flat, dead tone of his voice, that spooked them more than any threat could have. The leader's hand drifted toward the pistol on his hip. "You think you can stop us, old man?" "I think you made a mistake," Silas said, his eyes never leaving the leader's. "You came here looking for something that doesn't belong to you. You put your hands on a woman who was under my protection." The leader's eyes narrowed. "Your protection? We ain't seen you around here before." "I was gone," Silas said, "but now I'm back." One of the younger men, drunk on his own confidence, decided he'd had enough talk. He drew his pistol, a clumsy, fast motion. But he never got a shot off. There was a deafening roar, not from Silas's rifle, from somewhere else. A second rifle, hidden. The man screamed and dropped his gun, clutching a hand that was suddenly a mess of blood. He'd been shot clean through the palm. The other 3 men froze, spinning around, their eyes wide with panic, searching the empty fields. Who else was out there? Silas hadn't moved. He hadn't even flinched. But a slow, cold smile touched his lips. "I said I wasn't running again," he said, his voice carrying across the yard. "I never said I came back alone." The leader stared at him, then at the empty landscape. Fear was creeping into his eyes. He was a bully, and bullies are cowards when the odds turn against them. Who was this man? Where did the shot come from? From inside the cabin, there was a small cry. One of the boys had peeked through the window. The sound broke the spell. The leader's eyes darted toward the cabin door, a new, ugly idea forming on his face. "She's got kids in there." He lunged for the porch. Silas moved like lightning. He didn't reach for his rifle. He dropped it, stepping forward and seizing the man's wrist, twisting it until bone grated. The man howled in pain. Silas slammed him back against the porch post, the wood cracking under the force. "Get on your horses," Silas growled, his voice a low thunder. "And ride. You ride until you forget this place exists. If I ever see your faces again, the next shot won't be a warning." They scrambled. They pulled their wounded man onto his horse, and they rode, hard and fast, kicking up a cloud of dust that was a monument to their fear. The leader, his face pale with pain and humiliation, glared back at Silas one last time before disappearing into the heat haze. Silence descended again, heavy and ringing. Silas stood there, his chest heaving, the smell of gunpowder sharp in the air. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the effort of holding back a lifetime of violence. When he finally turned and went back inside, Mary was sitting up in bed, her eyes wide. She'd seen it all. "Who was that?" she whispered. "Who shot him?" Silas walked over to the other side of the cabin, where a loose floorboard was slightly askew. He lifted it up. A small, dark space was revealed beneath, and from that space, a hand reached up, holding a smoking rifle. Eli, his 7-year-old face grim and covered in dust, climbed out of the hole. He'd been hiding there the whole time, a second rifle, his father's old hunting rifle, clutched in his small hands. He hadn't been peeking through the window. He'd been aiming through a crack in the floor. Silas looked from the boy, his son, a boy who had just shot a man to protect his family, to Mary, whose face was a mixture of horror and awe. The world had just tilted on its axis. He hadn't come back to save them. In a way, they had just saved him. John ran to his brother, hugging him tight. "You did it, Eli. You were so brave." Eli just stood there, the heavy rifle dangling from his hand, his eyes fixed on Silas. He hadn't just shot a man. He had made a choice. He had become something new in that moment. Silas knelt down in front of him, his heart a painful drum against his ribs. He gently took the rifle from the boy's hands. "You did what you had to do," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "But you should never have had to." He looked at Mary, and the unspoken question hung in the air between them. What have we done to these children? What kind of world have we brought them into? She held out a hand to her son. "Come here, Eli." The boy went to her, burying his face in her shoulder, and finally, the tears he'd been holding back began to fall. Not tears of fear, but tears of release. Silas knew this was just the beginning. The men would be back. They weren't just bullies. They were part of the crew he'd abandoned. They hadn't come for grain. They had come for him. And now they knew he was here. Even worse, they knew he had a family. A weakness. That night, as the boys slept, he sat with Mary. They didn't talk about the past. Not yet. They talked about the future. "They won't stop," she said, her voice stronger now. "They think you have the money." "I don't," he said. I never took it. I left it all behind. They don't believe that, she replied. Their kind never would. She looked at him, her gaze direct. What are you going to do? He had spent 10 years trying to escape his own past, hiding in the mountains, living like an animal, trying to forget the man he used to be. But his past had found him. It had found his family. You couldn't outrun a ghost. You had to turn and face it. I'm going to finish it, he said. He wasn't talking about a gunfight. He was talking about ending the story. He had to go to them, on his terms. He knew their leader, a man named Jedediah. He knew how Jedediah thought. He was greedy, and he was arrogant, and that could be used against him. You can't, she whispered. They'll kill you. They'll kill me if I stay here, he said. They'll come back with more men. They'll burn this place to the ground to get what they want. The only way to keep you and the boys safe is to cut the head off the snake. He stood up and went to the window, looking out at the moonlit plains. They think I have something they want. I'm going to make sure they get it. He had a plan, a dangerous, desperate plan. It involved a lie, a betrayal, and a place where he had sworn he would never return. An old, abandoned silver mine, deep in the Badlands. The same place where his old life had ended. It was where he was going to bury it for good. He turned back to her. I have to leave, just for a day or two. The fear in her eyes was sharp. Don't, she begged. Don't leave us again. This time, he said, his voice steady. I'm not running away from you. I'm running toward you. He crouched by her bed. I will come back. I swear it on their lives. He looked over at his sleeping sons. 2 perfect, innocent boys caught in a storm they didn't create. He had a debt to pay, and the price was his own fear. Before the sun rose, he was gone. He left the rifle with Eli, showed him how to reload it, how to brace it against the door. He told him not to be a hero, but to be a survivor. Then he rode south, not towards the mountains, but back toward the life he had tried so hard to kill. The Badlands were a wound on the face of the earth, red rock and canyons carved by 1,000,000 years of wind. Silas rode into the heart of it, feeling like a ghost returning to his own grave. He found their camp easily. Jedediah was predictable. He rode in slow, his hands raised, showing he was unarmed. Jedediah and his 3 remaining men came out of their tents, guns drawn. The man Eli shot had his arm in a dirty sling, his face twisted with hate. Silas, Jedediah said, a slow, cruel smile spreading across his face. I knew you'd come crawling back. I'm not crawling, Jed, Silas said calmly. I'm here to make a deal. We're past deals. We're going to take that money, and then we're going to pay a visit to that little family of yours. Silas's face remained a mask of stone. There is no money. I told you that 10 years ago. Liar, Jedediah spat. But, Silas continued, ignoring him, I know where something better is. A lost vein of silver, the one the old man was looking for before he died. I found his map. Jedediah's eyes narrowed with greed. The story of the lost Spanish silver vein was a legend in these parts. You're lying. Am I? Silas said. Why else would I come back? You want to be rich, Jed. Rich enough to buy your own state. This is how you do it, not with a bag of stolen payroll money. He saw the hook sink in. Greed was Jedediah's religion. You take me there, Jedediah growled. You show us. And if this is a trick... It's no trick, Silas said. But I have one condition. After we find it, you ride out of this territory. You leave my family alone. Forever. Jedediah laughed. You're in no position to make conditions. Then I guess the map dies with me, Silas said, shrugging. It was a gamble, but he knew his man. After a long, tense moment, Jedediah nodded. Fine. We have a deal. For now. Silas led them deep into the canyons, to the abandoned mine where their gang had fallen apart a decade earlier. The entrance was a dark mouth in the side of a cliff. The timbers were rotting. "It's in there," Silas said. "At the bottom of the main shaft. The map was hidden in my wife's locket. That's what you were really after, wasn't it?" Jedediah's eyes gleamed. He shoved Silas forward. "After you." They descended into the darkness, the light from their lanterns casting dancing, monstrous shadows on the walls. The air was cold and dead. Finally, they reached the bottom of a deep shaft. A rotten wooden ladder was the only way down. "The vein is just through that tunnel," Silas said, pointing to a narrow passage. "You'll see the silver glinting in the rock." Jedediah ordered one of his men down the ladder. The man descended cautiously. As soon as he reached the bottom and stepped into the tunnel, Silas acted. With a powerful kick, he sent the rotting ladder crashing down into the darkness, splintering on the rocks below. The man in the tunnel was trapped. Jedediah and the other two spun around, raising their guns, but Silas was already moving. He wasn't a gunman anymore, but he was fast and strong. He tackled Jedediah, sending them both to the ground. The lantern flew from Jedediah's hand, hit the rock wall, and shattered, plunging them into near total darkness. The only light came from the other man's lantern, 50 feet away. In the confusion, Silas scrambled away, deeper into the mine's tunnels, a place he knew like the back of his hand. He could hear Jedediah screaming his name, firing blindly into the dark. This was his real plan. Not to fight them, but to trap them. To bury them in the place where their greed was born. He made his way through a side tunnel he knew led to a hidden exit, an air shaft on the other side of the ridge. Behind him, he heard a new sound, a low groaning. The mine was old, unstable. The gunshots had shaken something loose. He heard a shout of terror, followed by the thunderous roar of rock giving way. The main tunnel was collapsing. Silas didn't wait. He scrambled up the air shaft and burst out into the sunlight, covered in dust and gasping for air. He looked back at the mine. A huge cloud of red dust was pouring from the main entrance. The entire cliff face had collapsed in on itself. Silence. Jedediah and his men were gone, buried alive with their greed. Justice, served not by a bullet, but by the earth itself. He walked back to his horse, his whole body aching. He was free. For the first time in 10 years, he was truly free. When he rode back into the yard, Eli was sitting on the porch, the rifle across his lap. He saw Silas and his face broke into a grin. "You came back," the boy said. "I told you I would," Silas replied, swinging down from his horse. Mary came to the door, her face pale. She looked past him, searching the horizon. "It's over," Silas told her. "They're not coming back. Ever." The relief on her face was so complete it was like watching the sun rise. She stepped out onto the porch and for the first time, she reached for him not in fear or in memory, but in the here and now. He took her hand. It was warm. It was real. That evening, they sat on the porch together, a family framed by the setting sun. The boys were chasing fireflies in the yard. The world was quiet. "Why did you leave, Silas?" Mary asked softly, the question she had held in her heart for a decade. "I left to protect you," he said, his voice raw. "After the robbery, I knew what Jedediah was, what they all were. I thought if I disappeared, they'd leave you alone. I thought it was the only way to keep you safe from my world." "You could have taken us with you," she said, not with anger, but with a deep, quiet sadness. "I was a coward," he admitted. "I was so scared of the man I'd become. I thought the only way to save you was to cut myself out of your life. It was the stupidest, most selfish thing I've ever done." He looked at her, his eyes pleading for a forgiveness he knew he didn't deserve. "I spent 10 years trying to become a man worthy of you and them. A man who could fix things instead of just breaking them." She was quiet for a long time, watching their sons play. "Well," she said finally, a small smile touching her lips. "The door latch is fixed. It's a start." He laughed, a rusty, unfamiliar sound. It felt good. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the old silver locket. He handed it to her. "I think this belongs to you." She opened it. The drawing of her face was still there. She traced it with her finger, then looked up at him, her eyes shining. He hadn't just come back. He had found his way home. The road ahead was long, and the past would always be a part of their story. But it wasn't the end of it. It was just the beginning. The man who ran away was gone. The man who stayed had finally arrived. If you enjoyed this story of redemption and second chances, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss what happens next. You never know what ghosts from the past are waiting just over the horizon.